Worry is a prison from which we believe we cannot escape. A labyrinth of mirrors where each reflection represents a different fear, and we stand at the center, immobile, paralyzed by the illusion that anticipating pain is a form of protection. Carl Gustav Jung, the great explorer of the unconscious, has shown us that this prison is a construction of our psyche, an elaborate distraction that distances us from deeper and more disturbing truths. I invite you today on a journey into the abyss of the shadow, to explore the ancestral roots of worry, not as a simple psychological discomfort, but as a manifestation of an existential conflict between our aspiration for freedom and the terror of the unknown. As Kierkegaard observed, anxiety is the dizziness of freedom, a vertigo that drives us to create illusory structures of control. This will not be a discourse on anxiety management or relaxation techniques. Instead, we will investigate the ontological depths of worry to discover how the integration of the shadow, that part of ourselves we have exiled to the peripheries of consciousness, can transform us into more authentic and complete beings. Imagine finding yourself in a room full of mirrors. Each reflection represents a different worry, an unfinished project, a relationship in crisis, an uncertain future. You strive to manage each reflection, but the more you focus, the more the mirrors multiply, creating an endless labyrinth. This metaphor illustrates what Jung defined as the ego trap, the illusion that control is not only possible but desirable. One of the greatest naiveties of contemporary human beings is the belief that, through preventive worry, we can somehow dominate the indeterminacy of existence. But worry is not simply a dysfunctional mental activity. It is, as Heidegger would say, a way of being in the world that reveals our fundamental condition as beings thrown into an existence we did not choose in search of a meaning we must create. Reflect. How many of you have experienced the paradoxical experience of worrying about something that never happened? Or worse, of the realization of what you feared but in a completely different form than imagined? This is what Sartre called bad faith, the self-deception through which we hide our fundamental freedom from ourselves. We worry because we believe it gives us an illusion of control, while in reality we are escaping the vertiginous responsibility of creating ourselves. Evolutionary biology offers us a seemingly rational explanation. Our ancestors survived by anticipating threats. The predator in the shadows, the imminent famine, the enemy at the gates. This ability to predict danger was vital in hostile environments. But as Jung observed, we remain prisoners not only of our biology, but also of the narratives we construct around our identity. I am an anxious person. I worry because I'm a perfectionist. My anxiety is the price of my competence. These are not ontological truths, but mental habits, linguistic constructions that, unconsciously, we transform into existential prisons. Jung's revolutionary insight goes beyond simple psychology. Worry is a distraction, a veil covering something deeper, more disturbing, more authentic, the shadow. The shadow, in the Jungian conception, is not simply the dark side of personality, as popular culture often describes it. It is the receptacle of everything we have exiled from our conscious identity, impulses, desires, capacities, truths that we consider unacceptable or dangerous. As Jung states, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Consider this mental experiment. visualize something that deeply worries you. Now, instead of analyzing the content of the worry, ask yourself, what is this worry distracting me from? What deeper truth am I avoiding facing? Let's take the common case of incessant worry about the judgment of others. This social anxiety, examined superficially, might appear as simple insecurity. But if we follow Heidegger's indication to stay with the question, we discover that beneath this worry often lurks a more fundamental fear, that of existential rejection. We don't simply fear that others judge us negatively. We fear that their disapproval confirms our deepest fear, that we are fundamentally inadequate, incomplete, unworthy of belonging. Another illuminating example is chronic worry about financial security. Beyond rational prudence, this worry often masks a deeper conviction of scarcity, not only material but existential. The feeling that in some fundamental way we will never be enough. Jung invites us to see these worries not as problems to solve, but as portals toward the integration of the shadow. Each persistent anxiety is a messenger, a symbol that calls us to look deeper, to recognize and embrace the parts of ourselves that we have denied. As Merleau-Ponty observed, we are not neutral spectators of our experience, but embodied beings whose perception is always already imbued with meaning and value. Worry is never just worry. It is a way of inhabiting the world, of relating to the unknown. Confronting the shadow is not an undertaking for weak hearts. It requires what Kierkegaard called the leap of faith, not toward an external divinity, but toward the unknown within us. Shadow work in the Jungian conception does not consist of solving or eliminating the dark parts of our psyche. It consists rather of recognizing them, integrating them into our consciousness, thus allowing an alchemical transformation of personality. Imagine being constantly tormented by the fear of professional failure. Conventional psychology might suggest anxiety management techniques, positive affirmations, visualizations of success. But the Jungian approach is radically different. It would invite you to ask yourself, what does this failure represent? Which part of you is trying to emerge through this fear? Perhaps, as Jung suggested, what you resist persists. What you accept transforms. This process of confrontation with the shadow is not a simple psychological technique, but an existential experience that Jung called the individuation process, the path through which we become progressively more authentic, more integral, more complete. As Nietzsche proclaimed, you must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star. The integration of the shadow is precisely this creative chaos, this necessary dissolution that precedes rebirth. An eloquent example of this process is found in the life of the aforementioned Viktor Frankl, survivor of Nazi concentration camps. In his work, Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl describes how the acceptance of inevitable suffering, rather than futile resistance to it, allowed him to discover a sense of inner freedom that transcended external circumstances. This is not about passivity or resignation, but about what Eastern philosophers would call wu wei, effortless action that derives from deep alignment with one's authentic being. One of the most fascinating aspects of Jungian thought is the concept of synchronicity, those meaningful coincidences that seem to guide us toward a deeper understanding of reality. Jung observed that when we are trapped in obsessive worry, we become blind to these signs, to these messages that the universe is constantly sending us. Worry, like a dense fog, obscures our ability to perceive the meaningful connections that could guide us. Think about how many times you have been so worried about the future that you didn't notice an opportunity present right in front of you. Or so absorbed in negative thoughts that you didn't recognize a crucial message in the words of a friend, in the pages of a book, in the casual flight of a bird. As Heidegger reminds us, authentic existence requires a particular form of attention, what he called Gelassenheit, a relaxed openness to being that allows us to grasp the latent possibilities in the present. But how can we cultivate this trust in existence when we are accustomed to seeing the world as a constant threat? Jung suggests we observe nature as a teacher of wisdom. A tree does not try to control the wind or the rain. It simply grows, trusting that the sun will rise again. Similarly, Jung believed that life possessed a natural flow, a synchronicity that guides us even when we are not aware of it. This does not mean abandoning responsibility or rational planning. It means instead recognizing the limits of control and embracing what Sartre called the contingency of existence, the fundamental unpredictability and openness of human life. Trust in existence is not a guarantee that everything will go well according to our desires. It is the deep conviction that, whatever happens, we will have the inner resources to respond with authenticity and integrity. As Albert Camus wrote, "In the midst of winter I found there was, within me, an invincible summer." This invincible summer is precisely what we discover when we integrate the shadow and learn to trust the process of individuation. The deepest paradox that Jung invites us to consider is that true freedom is found in abandonment. Not an abandonment as passive surrender, but as active acceptance of what is. In the existentialist tradition, Simone de Beauvoir spoke of the ethical ambiguity of the human condition. We are beings who yearn for absolute freedom, yet we are necessarily bound by our finitude, our corporeality, our historical situation. Worry can be seen as a rebellion against this fundamental ambiguity, a desperate attempt to achieve certainty in an intrinsically uncertain universe. But what would happen if, instead of resisting uncertainty, we embraced it as the very condition of possibility? If, as Nietzsche suggested, we learned to love fate, amor fati, not as resignation, but as joyful affirmation of existence in all its unpredictability? The metaphor of sand slipping through fingers perfectly illustrates this paradox. The more we try to control, the more we lose our grip. Abandonment is not weakness, but the deepest form of strength, the ability to remain open and fluid in the face of the inevitable storms of existence. Recent neuroscientific research confirms the Jungian intuition. The human brain has a natural tendency to resist uncertainty, an evolutionary legacy designed to protect us. However, studies show that the practice of active acceptance can literally reconfigure our neural patterns, increasing our psychological resilience. This is not simply about positive thinking or denying the real difficulties of life. It is rather about what the philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty called being in the world, a way of existing characterized by openness to possibilities, creative improvisation, active engagement with life in all its facets. If worry is a storm on the surface, how can we access that deep calm that Jung associated with the authentic self? The process of individuation, the long and arduous journey towards psychic integration, represents the most powerful antidote to anxiety and chronic worry. Not because it eliminates the difficulties of life, but because it radically transforms our relationship with them. When we connect with who we truly are, beyond social expectations, superficial identifications, limiting narratives, external voices and internal fears gradually lose their tyrannical influence on our psyche. We no longer need to constantly prove our worth. We are no longer guided by the terror of inadequacy. Our life becomes an expression of our deepest values, rather than an anxious reaction to the perceived expectations of others. This process is not a linear path toward a fixed destination, but a continuous spiral of symbolic death and rebirth. As Jung observed, there is no birth of consciousness without pain. The integration of the shadow requires the courage to face what we fear most in ourselves. But it is precisely in this confrontation that we discover inner resources we didn't know we possessed, a resilience, a creativity, a wisdom that transcends the dichotomy between naive optimism and cynical pessimism. Imagine living not from the place of fear, but from the center of your authentic being. Not from the frantic activity of the worried mind, but from the calm awareness of the self. What would it be like to move through the world not as an anxious and isolated fragment, but as a unique and unrepeatable expression of existence itself? The journey we have undertaken today is not a simple intellectual exercise. It is an invitation to a radical transformation of your relationship with existence itself. Worry is not an enemy to defeat, but a messenger to listen to. The shadow is not a curse, but a hidden treasure. Uncertainty is not a threat, but the very foundation of human possibility. As Jung remembered, we do not fear the light, but the shadow. Yet paradoxically, it is precisely in embracing the shadow that we find our most authentic luminosity. The process of individuation, of becoming who we truly are, is the work of a lifetime. It is never definitively completed, but each step in this journey is already, in itself, a liberation. I leave you with the words of Rilke, which capture the essence of what Jung has taught us about the transformative power of embracing the unknown. Be patient toward all that is unresolved in your heart. Love the questions themselves. Do not now seek the answers which cannot be given you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. If this journey into the Jungian shadow has resonated with you, I invite you to share your reflections in the comments. Not as mere spectators, but as fellow travelers in the endless adventure of individuation. Thank you for undertaking this path with me.